A shadow is cast on the last day of the summit by the murder of 7 border guards in the Republic of Lithuania.
From ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings, reporting tonight from Moscow.
Good evening. The summit meeting between Presidents Bush and Gorbachev is over. They have signed the very first treaty to eliminate long-range nuclear weapons, and now the spotlight moves on. To domestic policy in the Soviet Union, Mr. Gorbachev has another problem with that pre-dawn murder in the Republic of Lithuania. President Bush has the Middle East. He turns up the pressure on Israel to come and negotiate peace with the Arabs. On the Middle East, Mr. Bush and Mr. Gorbachev agreed. Here's ABC's Britt Hume.
President Bush came into this summit with most of what would come out of it pre-planned. That included this morning's ceremonious wreath-laying at the Kremlin's Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, and the first visit ever by a U.S. president to the Soviet leader's stately official dacha, his Camp David. What was not certain was what the two leaders might agree at their meeting to say about a jointly sponsored Middle East peace conference. Secretary of State Baker had been working feverishly but unsuccessfully to get Israel to agree, as several Arab states had done, to take part in such a conference. So it seemed there was nothing for the two leaders to announce on that subject at their joint news conference this afternoon. But after some vague Gorbachev comments about a joint U.S.-Soviet position on the Middle East, President Bush explained they had agreed, as he put it, to work toward an October peace conference under joint sponsorship.
Invitations to the conference will be issued at least 10 days prior to the date the conference is to convene. And I am today asking Secretary of State Jim Baker to return to the Middle East to obtain Israel's answer to our proposal for peace.
Did that mean they had in effect announced the peace conference without knowing if Israel would come?
Well, I would wait and let Secretary Baker answer that question after this next meeting. If I had the answer in my pocket, or he did, I expect that we would say so.
So the United States, with the Soviets joining in, is calling a peace conference and daring Israel to refuse to come. The Soviets will no doubt see this as marking a new moment in U.S.-Soviet relations. The Israelis, though, are more likely to see it as a new and, for them, none too welcome moment in U.S.-Israeli relations. Britt Hume, ABC News, Moscow.
In fact, President Bush and his Secretary of State have been tougher than recent U.S. administrations on the Israelis. Mr. Bush said he was a little more optimistic today about the chances for a peace conference, but the Israelis are not optimistic, and the Israeli government sees itself in a quandary. Here's ABC's Dean Reynolds.
For most Israelis, the president's announcement in Moscow was big news. But government officials were told about it beforehand, and one, with grudging admiration, called it a shrewd move by Mr. Bush.
We share the strong conviction that this historic opportunity must not be lost.
That seemed to put even more pressure on Israel to come up with a positive answer to the peace conference proposal. But while Secretary Baker wants an answer from Israel tomorrow, the Israelis insist it is he who must answer them first on a number of outstanding issues.
If everything was clear and finished, then there would be no need for further talks.
The Israelis want Baker to agree in writing that they can veto any proposed Palestinian delegate to the talks, that they can have an advance look at the invitations to guard against any wording they don't like, that Palestinians who attend the opening conference remain silent and let the Jordanians do the talking for them, and that the Palestinian flag be barred from the talks. As one official put it, Yitzhak Shamir doesn't want to come to a conference and stare at a PLO flag across the table. If Baker agrees, Israel will say yes. If Baker agrees, the Palestinians may well say no.
I think then it will be very clear that this process is a dead end. It's not leading anywhere because it is based on illegal premises.
So despite the momentum generated in Moscow today, Secretary Baker will be returning here tomorrow to face essentially the same Israeli-Palestinian problem that has persisted through his 5 previous trips. It's a problem made all the more difficult by the fact that neither side seems very willing to help him solve it. Dean Reynolds, ABC News, Tel Aviv.
In the traditional sense, the most important moment of this summit was this morning. Presidents Bush and Gorbachev signed the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. Because the U.S.-Soviet relationship has become so much better in the last half-dozen years, there wasn't quite the sense of relief there might have been. Still, the treaty that took 9 years to negotiate will reduce the number of U.S. and Soviet long-range nuclear missiles by about a third. Both men thought it very symbolic for the world as a whole, but since both countries kept on building nuclear weapons while the treaty was being negotiated, it lowers the level to about where it was when the negotiators first sat down. Still and all, it was history. In a moment, today's murders in Lithuania, almost universally regarded as a cynical ploy to undermine Mikhail Gorbachev while George Bush was in town. And later in the broadcast, a singular example of what it is like to live here.